Chapter 241, Two Firebolts. 4 days later, on Saturday, the sky was a sheet of lead-gray clouds and heavy rain hammered down. Still, the Quidditch pitch at Hogwarts buzzed with energy. Today was the first match of the term, Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff. By 10 in the morning, the stands for the four houses were crammed with students in raincoats and umbrellas. In the Gryffindor changing room, Harry stood with his firebolt, his stomach doing little flips. This was his first official match on the firebolt. Their opponents had rebuilt their Hufflepuff team over the summer and were said to be strong, especially their seeker, Cedric Diggory. Even so, Harry felt confident. He had a firebolt now. With a superior broom, defeat seemed unlikely. A shout from outside cut through his thoughts. Out, Wood's voice rang out. Harry followed him out, the firebolt under his arm. Through the rain, he saw the pale yellow of Hufflepuff, their opponents already lined up. The two teams halted face to face at the center of the pitch. At the first glance, everyone on Gryffindor froze. Harry was no exception. Standing at the head of the Hufflepuff team, shining even through the rain, was a broom identical to his own, a firebolt. Cedric Diggory held it in his hands, and under the wet gray sky the broom gleamed. Harry felt his confidence drop. The firebolt was no longer his unique advantage. "I hope this will be a fair match," Cedric said to Wood with a friendly smile. "I'm really looking forward to it." Wood nodded without smiling. If he was worried, he didn't show it, but it was clear the situation had just become a lot tougher. Hufflepuff's squad was no pushover. In the stands, Professor Wisen sat among the Hufflepuff students, a pleased look on his face. A close, evenly matched game was far more entertaining. The firebolt Cedric rode had been given to him by Professor Wisen. Wisen had once owned a firebolt, but had never had a real use for it. He donated it to his house so its best player could use it. As a Hufflepuff, supporting his house team was only natural, and Cedric's skill made the choice easy. Wisen had few criticisms of the boy. Cedric was, in his eyes, nearly faultless. Nearby, a student handed Professor Wisen a pair of binoculars. "Here you go, Professor Ernie." "Thanks, Ernie," Professor Wisen said, taking them and lifting the lenses. The binoculars were magical. Even in the downpour, the scene on the pitch came into clear focus through the glass. The rain seemed to vanish. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "Cedric gave them to us," Ernie said, voice full of admiration. "He said he made them himself. I could never do anything like that." Wisen turned the binoculars over. Cedric was more accomplished than he'd thought. Madame Hooch's whistle sounded, and the first match of term began. Players shot into the sky, red and yellow figures weaving through the rain, and cheers rose up from the stands. The weather made the match hard to follow for most. The worst of the crowd simply cheered when others did. But those who could see focused on two particular figures, Harry and Cedric. They spotted the golden snitch early and tangled fast, their speed far above the other players. "They've both got new brooms," Ernie murmured, watching through Vincent's binoculars. Midway through the match, the scoreboard read 90-70 as the halftime whistle blew. Hufflepuff trailed, but not by much. With such a close score, the outcome hinged on the Seekers. In the first half, Harry and Cedric had been constantly on each other's tails. Neither could shake the other, and each time one of them spotted the snitch, the other was close enough to prevent a catch. Ernie lowered the binoculars and, anxious, turned to call for Professor Wisen. "Oh, Potter's keeping up with Cedric. Can we win? Professor Wisen, Professor Wisen." The empty seat beside him was bare. The binoculars lay quietly on the bench where Wisen had been. Strange, Ernie thought. He scratched his head. This was an important moment. Where had their professor gone? He set the worry aside as the teams returned to play after the break. A short distance from the pitch, in a wide open space, an ominous shadow was gathering. Professor Wisen stood in the rain, wand gripped in his hand. He stared through the downpour at a mass of dark figures assembling in the distance. Dementors were arriving from every direction, drawn in, and Wisen counted them roughly, at least 100. He had never seen so many in one place. Wisen guessed their target, the Quidditch match. The pitch held the pure, intense happiness and excitement of hundreds of students, an irresistible feast for Dementors. He could picture them drifting in, greedily inhaling the joy like wolves scenting blood. The Dementors had begun their slow glide toward the stadium when Vincent stepped directly into their path. "Last warning," he called out, pointing his wand at them, voice ringing across the rain. "You have no right to enter. Withdraw at once." The Dementors stalled for a moment, sensing the threat of power, but then they resumed their approach. Did a human think he could stop them? The thought lasted only a heartbeat. They simply kept coming. Vincent sighed and glanced around. Where were the ministry officials responsible for them? If the ministry didn't send someone soon, something bad would happen, and it wouldn't end well for anyone, especially the Dementors. Chapter 242, The Fallen Dementors. Just as Vincent was searching for whoever was in charge of the Dementors, one of the creatures from the front row suddenly erupted, lunging at him with an unbearable cold. Vincent stepped aside at the last moment, narrowly avoiding the attack and wiping his brow. Dementors resorting to sneak attacks, how dishonorable, but since they had struck first, he no longer needed to hold back. Expecto Patronum. His wand traced a silver arc in the rain. White light surged out like a tide, forming a hazy mist around him. For a heartbeat, all the Dementors froze. Vincent wasn't about to let them off so easily. Dumbledore had made it clear they mustn't get near any students. He intended to teach them a lesson. A small white hedgehog materialized in the mist, lightly hopping onto Vincent's shoulder. He reached up, stroked its head, and murmured, "Looks like you agree." The hedgehog gave a fierce cry. The mist writhed and expanded, silver-white light pouring from the tip of Vincent's wand and spreading across the open space. The Dementors shrieked as if sensing true danger and began to recoil. Vincent smiled slightly. The light suddenly condensed above him into a towering silver oak, the tree of wisdom Patronus, its luminous branches cutting through the gloom. The Dementors panicked and tried to flee, but the tree did not negotiate. Silver roots shot forth like living tendrils, coiling around every escaping creature. Wherever the dark things touched those roots, black smoke flared as if they were burning, and horrible wails tore from them. Vincent watched with cold eyes. He wasn't certain whether his tree of wisdom would truly kill them, but it would make them pay for threatening his students. The Dementors' cries grew until several of them, unable to withstand it, fell from the sky. Their ragged forms slid to the muddy ground and lay still. When the last visible Dementor collapsed, Vincent gave a casual flick of his wand, and the giant Patronus dissolved into silver light in the rain. The hedgehog on his shoulder chirped triumphantly. The open space was littered with the remains. The Dementors' bodies had vanished, leaving only tattered robes behind. Those husks still exuded an icy, sinister aura, so Vincent did not assume they were truly dead. Satisfied that they'd been taught a lesson, he slipped away quietly before anyone noticed. By the time he returned to the Quidditch pitch, the match was nearly over. "Where did you go, Professor?" Ernie asked. Vincent had vanished and suddenly reappeared. "The restroom," Vincent replied with a universal answer, scanning the stands. Heavy rain and the intensity of the match had hidden the earlier disturbance. Everyone was fixed on the field. That was fine. It had saved him a lot of trouble. Madam Hooch's whistle blew. Cheers erupted across the pitch, Hufflepuff's section especially alive, banners waving as students shouted the house's name. Vincent watched the field and saw a figure hovering in the air with the golden snitch clenched in his hand. "Cedric, we won," Ernie crowed, nearly dropping his binoculars. Cedric circled the Hufflepuff stands on his broom, waving, and even raised a hand toward Vincent. Vincent smiled and nodded. He was glad Hufflepuff had won. Harry had been bested for the snitch, and upset perhaps, but loss could be an important lesson. Harry would grow from it. An hour later, in the warm glow of the Hufflepuff common room, the house celebrated by the fireplace. Comfortable sofas and a cheerful fire made for a cozy scene. Professor Sprout moved among the students with a pile of butterbeer, handing mugs out with a proud smile. As head of house, she was overjoyed. Hufflepuff's Quidditch team had not seen much success in years, and this might be their best chance at the championship. Vincent accepted a mug from Sprout and praised, "Cedric's an excellent student." "Of course," Sprout said proudly. "Actually, I think Cedric might be the best student at Hogwarts." Vincent nodded. In the original timeline, Cedric had become Hogwarts champion in the Triwizard Tournament. That had been proof enough of his abilities. It had been a tragedy that he later died. Now that Vincent was here, he had no intention of letting that happen again. Cedric pushed his way through the celebrating crowd and brightened when he saw Vincent. "Professor!" He hurried up and handed over a long, cloth-wrapped object. "The firebolt. It's for you." "Keep it, Cedric," Vincent said with a small smile. "It's for the whole Hufflepuff team. Anyone can use it, but I think it'll be most effective in your hands right now." His words carried through the common room. Realization spread. The firebolt in Cedric's hands had been given by Vincent. Cheers exploded, filling the Hufflepuff common room with delighted noise. Chapter 243, Fudge's Reaction. Early the next morning, in the headmaster's office, Professor Vincent had lost count of how many times Dumbledore had invited him in for tea. "Hagrid told me he found many torn cloaks not far from the Quidditch pitch," Dumbledore said gravely from behind his desk. "After assessment by the Ministry, these were left by Dementors. Many were severely injured and have been sent back to Azkaban to recuperate." He leaned forward a little. "Is there anything you'd like to tell me, Professor Vincent?" Vincent blinked innocently. "Why was I called here, Professor Dumbledore? I don't know anything." Dumbledore immediately guessed this must be the work of their Care of Magical Creatures professor. Still, it was a little extreme. He had told Vincent he could act against the Dementors if necessary, but sending almost all of them back to Azkaban in one go exceeded every expectation. Dumbledore had long been unhappy about the Dementors' presence at Hogwarts. They had searched the castle for Black without finding him, and in the meantime had caused a great deal of trouble. Perhaps he had been mistaken to allow them here at all. The seriousness left his face, and he put on a gentle smile. "All right, Professor Vincent, I think I understand." Vincent shrugged, took a sip of the sickly sweet black tea, and asked casually, "Since the Dementors are badly injured, what about the Ministry? How are they reacting?" "You'll know soon enough." Dumbledore's expression clouded briefly. He didn't elaborate. Of course the Ministry would act. Dementors belonged to them, and hundreds being incapacitated was a serious matter. Just then the door was flung open roughly. "Albus, I demand an explanation." Cornelius Fudge burst into the office like an enraged boar. His bowler sat crooked, his purple-striped tie was loose. He'd clearly left in a hurry. Vincent set his teacup down and watched the Minister of Magic with mild interest. "Nearly 200 Dementors." Fudge ignored Vincent and flailed at Dumbledore, spittle flying. "They need a month to recuperate. Nothing like this has ever happened since Dementors came into existence." "I've read your letter, Cornelius," Dumbledore said calmly, adjusting his spectacles and folding his hands. "There's no need to be so anxious. It isn't the end of the world." "No big deal?" Fudge snapped, his voice rising. He took off his hat, revealing thinning hair. "Those are Dementors. Nothing has ever harmed them before. Tell me, who did it?" Vincent took another sip of tea, the corners of his mouth lifting faintly. "It's done now. There's nothing to be gained by wringing hands," Dumbledore said. He cast a quick, deliberate look at Vincent. "As for who, I'm not certain." "Not certain?" Fudge narrowed his eyes and shifted his stare to Vincent. He leaned forward like a hound on a scent. "Professor Vincent, you have unusual methods for dealing with Dementors. You must know something." Vincent sighed inwardly. Of course, Fudge suspected him. He'd shown on the train that he could harm Dementors, but this was to be expected. He set down his cup and shook his head calmly. "I'm not aware, Minister. No matter how capable I am, I couldn't have taken on that many Dementors by myself. You know how formidable they are." Fudge's face puckered into a knot as he turned back to Dumbledore. If not Vincent, then the most powerful wizard in the room had to be the headmaster. Dumbledore seemed to read the thought and answered before Fudge could speak. "Cornelius, I must point out that the damage to these Dementors has absolutely nothing to do with me." Fudge groped for a reply, then blurted, "Then what happened? 200 Dementors just flew and fell on their own? Were they cursed flying carpets?" Dumbledore spread his hands and said nothing. His measured indifference only enraged Fudge more. He suspected Dumbledore, but without proof could do nothing. "Without the Dementors, Black could run riot in Hogwarts," he snapped, then strode out of the office. After he'd gone, Dumbledore smiled at Vincent. "Don't worry," he said. What Cornelius said was only in the heat of the moment. The black matter affects the Ministry deeply. They'll take other measures, I'm sure. Vincent worried briefly about what would happen if Fudge uncovered his involvement. He had acted in self-defense, and if it came to it, he could let Dumbledore take the blame. The headmaster had said he could deal with the Dementors after all. That would do. A coup! Vincent had barely left the office when Dumbledore sneezed. "It's a bit chilly lately," he murmured, rubbing his nose. "Perhaps I should change into a thicker robe." That afternoon, as Dumbledore had predicted, the Ministry did act. After the Dementors assigned to Hogwarts were sent back to Azkaban, the Ministry did not replace them with new Dementors. Instead, they gradually stationed Aurors around the castle to take over the guarding duties. Dumbledore had no qualms about admitting Aurors into Hogwarts. Unlike Dementors, they would not harm students for no reason. Students soon noticed the change. The Weasley twins were positively delighted. Before, the presence of Dementors had made them cautious. After all, the Marauders map did not show Dementors' names, and there'd always been a tiny chance of running into one. With Aurors on patrol instead, they felt they could be a little bolder about sneaking out at night. Chapter 244, Tonks. On the second day the Aurors were stationed at Hogwarts, Vincent shut his office door, stretched, and stepped into the dim corridor. "That's my cue," he murmured, reaching up to stroke the small hedgehog Patronus that had materialized on his shoulder with a soft chirp. He meant to check on Bart. The old tree had been unusually subdued since the Dementor incident, and a parent's instinct made him want to spend a little extra time with it. Crossing the courtyard, he almost ran into a familiar figure. Lupin? The man approaching made Vincent start. It was rare to see Lupin out and about like this. Tonight, of all nights, the moon was full, and Vincent felt the unease of it press against his thoughts. Lupin should have been hiding somewhere safe. Vincent had given him a purification potion earlier, and the new professor should be keeping to shadows until the worst passed. "Hello," Lupin said calmly, nodding. Something wasn't right. Vincent narrowed his eyes. "Wait a moment," he said, and grabbed the man's arm. "What's wrong?" the man asked, turning. Then Vincent's devil's snare lashes shot from his sleeve and curled up the arm he had just seized. The vines tightened, coiling around the wrist and then the throat. The man went pale. "Let me go, sir. I'm surrendering," he gasped. As the vines loosened, the voice shifted, the timbre changing from the soft wariness Vincent associated with Lupin to a younger, breathier pitch. The man blinked, and where Lupin had been stood a woman with bright pink hair and dark, alert eyes. "Oh," she panted. "Nymphadora Tonks, Auror Office, Ministry of Magic. I was sent to assist in the capture of Sirius Black." Vincent loosened the devil's snare entirely and let it retreat. Of course he knew Tonks. She was a natural metamorph magus, capable of changing her appearance at will. What puzzled him was why she had chosen Lupin's features. "I'm sorry," she added, rubbing her neck and shoulders, slightly embarrassed. "I was patrolling and thought it would be easier to move about disguised as a faculty member. I didn't mean to startle anyone." "You must be new," Vincent said with a raised eyebrow. "How did you know?" Her face warmed. "Noelle, I'm still in training. I'm not a full Auror yet." "You don't need to explain," he said. "Does the Ministry only send trainees?" Tonks scratched her head. "I'm an exception." "All right, Tonks." He offered a hand. "I'm Adrian Wisen, Professor of Care of Magical Creatures here at Hogwarts. Pleasure to meet you, but next time please show yourself, at least while you're inside the castle." She took his hand and pouted a little. She clearly had respect for professors, though she seemed surprised she hadn't seen him before. "What do you teach?" she asked. "Care of Magical Creatures." "And Professor Kettleburn?" she asked. "He retired 3 years ago. I replaced him. By the way, the Lupin you were imitating is our new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor this year." Tonks blinked, putting it together. She remembered Lupin from that morning, a gentle, middle-aged man. That had been why she'd thought to copy him. "Oh, right," she said. Vincent glanced at his pocket watch. "I should be going. See you tomorrow, Tonks." "Where are you headed?" she asked. "Into the Forbidden Forest," he said, not bothering to hide it. It wasn't exactly a secret. Tonks' eyes lit up. "Really? Wait, Professor, I'm coming too." Vincent stopped and looked at her sideways. "What for?" "Sirius Black." Tonks lowered her voice, but the excitement couldn't be hidden. "Everyone says he's probably hiding in the forest. I want to find him." Vincent suppressed a smile. She was young and eager, either wildly overconfident or prone to trusting strangers. When she mentioned Hufflepuff, she brightened. Learning they were both from the same house seemed to cement her trust in him. "Come along, then," he said. "But I'll tell you now, searching the entire Forbidden Forest for one person is basically impossible." "You don't need to worry," Tonks replied, grinning. "I'm good at reconnaissance and tracking." About 10 minutes later, they stepped beneath the forest's shadowed trees. Tonks chattered the whole way, delighted to be walking openly beneath the branches. "This is my first time openly in the Forbidden Forest," she said. "As a student, I never would have dared." "I would have given you a month of detention for that," Vincent replied dryly. "Oh, but I'm on duty now." She puffed with pride. "Howl," Vincent began, and a long, piercing howl rolled through the trees, cutting off the rest of his sentence. Tonks froze, alert. "Relax," Vincent said with a small smile. "It's just a werewolf. They're common in here." Tonks's vigilance didn't fade. "I need to check it out. We can't ignore anything suspicious." Vincent nodded. "Fine, if you insist. I'm going to see a friend now." "A friend?" she asked, puzzled. "A little darling who lives in the forest," he said succinctly. Tonks understood. As care of magical creatures professor, his friend would be some sort of animal. "Then let's split up," she said without hesitation. He agreed, and they moved off in different directions through the gloom, each searching in their own way, Tonks for a fugitive, Vincent for the creature that needed him. Chapter 245, Bart's Friend and Lupin's Transformation. After saying goodbye to Tonks, Vincent made his way toward Bart's clearing. He wasn't worried about Tonks. She was a probationary Auror with years of training. Aside from a truly unlucky encounter with Black, nothing in the Forbidden Forest could have threatened her. "Master, Bart has been waiting for you for a long time." Bart's cheerful voice carried across the trees. Vincent quickened his pace. When he stepped into the familiar clearing, he let off a little of his magic as usual. The scent of the metamorphosis potion lingered in the air. Bart's branches shivered with excitement, like a child greeting returning parents. Status, growing %. When the Tree of Wisdom transmitted Bart's data, Vincent nodded in satisfaction. At this rate, Bart would soon enter the next stage of growth. "Oh, right, Master," Bart almost forgot to say. Bart's gnarled face brightened. "Bart made a friend earlier." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Who is your friend?" "A human like Master," Bart said, branches waving. "Black hair, small, and a good person." Vincent paused. The description was vague, but who else might be wandering the Forbidden Forest at this hour? Sirius Black came to mind. He scanned the soft mud and found a few faint footprints. "Bart, does your friend leave prints like this?" Vincent's tone sharpened. He produced a blank piece of parchment and handed it to Bart. Before the tree could touch it, an image of Black had already formed on the page. Bart squinted at the portrait, concentrating. After a half-minute, he exclaimed, delighted, "It's him! Bart's friend is him!" Vincent's expression tightened. Bart's friend really was Black, a curious coincidence. "When was the last time your friend came?" he asked. "I'd like to meet him too." "Just a few days ago," Bart said, happily. "Does Master want to meet Bart's friend?" "Bart will tell him." "No rush," Vincent waved him off. "We'll wait until he shows up again." Deep in the Forbidden Forest, Tonks moved through the fallen leaves, the tip of her wand shedding a faint glow. Although she had been in the forest during school, this was the deepest she'd ever gone. She felt a mix of nerves and excitement, and she kept telling herself she wasn't here out of curiosity. Of course not. She was here on official business, searching for criminals hiding in the trees. She followed the direction the howls had come from. After a few minutes, another howl split the night, this time nearly at her feet. Tonks froze. A huge werewolf stood only a short distance away, golden eyes fixed on her in the moonlight. Around it, 3 or 4 ordinary wolves circled. Good evening?" Tonks forced a laugh and eased her wand into her hand. "Nice weather tonight, isn't it?" She knew werewolves were dangerous, but she'd handled them before and trusted her training. She planned to wait for the first move and counter with the magic she knew. The wolves, however, did something unexpected. The large creature sighed in a way that sounded almost human. Its maw moved, and a composed, human voice issued. "Good evening, miss. I don't know what brings you here, but you'd best leave." Tonks stared. The creature's eyes held calm and reason. This one had taken wolfsbane and seemed disinclined to attack. "State your name," she said, keeping her wand steady. "I'm an auror from the Ministry of Magic." The werewolf, no, the man inside the wolf, nodded. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Auror, but please leave. I don't want anyone to get hurt." At that warning, the surrounding wolves bared their teeth and crept nearer, growling. "All right, I'm going." Tonks backed away slowly, keeping clear of the pack. She had no desire to take on a werewolf alone if she could help it. Then something astonishing happened. The great creature convulsed, arching its back as if in sudden, painful spasm. Its fur thinned, claws retracted, and in the moonlight, the wolf's shape melted into a gaunt but gentle man. Tonks gaped. "What's going on?" The man looked at his hands in disbelief. "Please leave now." No sooner had he spoken than his body convulsed again. Bones cracked with a horrible sound. The human face he'd just shown was rapidly overrun by fur, the gentle man becoming the terrible wolf in the span of a heartbeat. Chapter 246, Bart's Transformation. "This is so cool." Tonks watched, eyes wide, as Remus Lupin shifted, human to wolf, and back again, with the sort of breathless fascination most people save for fireworks. Lupin, caught mid-change, could only sigh and press a hand to his forehead. He'd met trouble today in the form of an unflappable young auror. "Hasn't anyone ever told you to stay away from werewolves?" he asked, more exasperated than angry. Tonks shrugged. "But you can control yourself, can't you? If that's true, what do I have to fear?" Lupin sank onto a flat stone and stared at the black sky. "I'm waiting for the moon to set," he said slowly. "After that, I'll be safe." "Aren't you safe now?" Tonks tilted her head, puzzled. He hesitated. He could shift back into a human now, thanks in part to the purification potion, but Lupin's caution ran deep. As long as the changes were part of him, he had to be vigilant. Anyone could lose control in an instant. His face tightened, and a few gray wolves at his feet nosed his legs as if to comfort him. Lupin smiled and stroked their heads. They were the wolves he'd met in the Forbidden Forest during the last full moon. Beautiful, sleek, and startlingly intelligent. He could talk to them almost as easily as he could talk to people, and their company had made his last transformation far more bearable. Tonks watched all of it and felt oddly reassured. This overturned everything she'd assumed about werewolves. Time drifted. To Lupin's surprise, Tonks stayed. She peppered him with questions about the sensations of transforming, what it felt like to run on all fours, how the mind worked during the change. Lupin, who hated talking about such things, found himself answering. There was no malice in her curiosity, only plain, honest interest. By the first gray of dawn, catching at the leaves, his fur receded, his claws folded away, and the last of the lupine features fell from him. For the first time in weeks, he noticed something else, a hollow, a small loss. It seemed the ability to shift outside the full moon had diminished. He would only change on the night itself now. The wolves gave one last affectionate rub and melted back into the morning mist. "We should go back," he said, standing. "I don't think you should be out here so long." "Call me Tonks," she replied, brushing leaves from her cloak. "Honestly, I never thought Hogwarts would employ a werewolf as a professor," she hurried to add. "Not that I think you're dangerous. It's just surprising." Lupin smiled wryly. "I'm surprised, too." After that afternoon, Tonks kept his secret. Lupin and Tonks became acquaintances, then friends. Vincent noticed. The pair were even seen laughing over drinks at the Three Broomsticks one Saturday. Lupin told Vincent about the latest effect of the purification potion. On the nights of the full moon, he could now change form at will. Vincent beamed at the news. If the potion was stripping away the worst of the curse's cruelty, perhaps it could be refined to remove the rest. If all the undesirable effects were gone, Lupin might one day master his lycanthropy entirely. Weeks passed. By late November, Vincent resumed his routine visits to the forest and to Bart. "Has your friend shown up yet?" he asked on a bright morning. Since Bart had first befriended the Wolf Black, he'd rarely mentioned him again. "No," Bart answered sadly. "Since last time, friend did not come to see Bart." "That's a shame," Vincent said softly. "Maybe they're just busy. Don't worry. If you like, I can introduce you to some other friends." "Bart likes friends." Bart brightened at once, every knot and bough seeming to smile. Vincent grinned, and a little worried about the tree's naivete, reached into his satchel for a tall glass bottle. Bart had grown steadily. His growth gauge had reached a critical stage. Vincent had the final potion ready. He checked the little slate he carried like a wizarding gardener's clipboard. Name Bart, beach tree, leader, status growing 9%. "This ought to do it," Vincent murmured, unscrewing the cork. Bart's nose, thick, knobby roots that lifted the soil, twitched twice, his small carved face lit with hope. "Is this for Bart?" "For you," Vincent said, holding the potion of growth up. Bart watched the liquid with wide, hungry eyes. "What will Bart become if he drinks this?" he asked. Vincent shrugged. "A bit taller, a bit stronger maybe, or there might be no change. Every tree's different." He poured the potion at the base of Bart's trunk. The liquid soaked into the bark like rain. Bart widened his faceplates and his whole body trembled. "Bart feels strange," he said in a small voice. "It's part of the process," Vincent reassured him, stepping back to watch. Green light spilled from Bart in a slow, swelling glow. It grew brighter and brighter until Vincent had to shade his eyes. The radiance wrapped around Bart's massive form, rising into branches and leaves and the roots that held the earth. Then, as if someone had clicked a switch, the light snapped off. Vincent opened his eyes and leaned forward, expecting new height, a broader crown, anything that would mark the completion of the growth. Bart looked exactly the same as before. No new rings, no extra girth, no taller topmost leaf. He inspected himself, then looked up at Vincent with a puzzled blink. Bart doesn't seem to have changed," he said, confused. Chapter 247, The Great Leader and the Troublemaking Twins. "No, Bart," Vincent said seriously. "You've gotten stronger." "Really?" Bart blinked after hearing his master. It didn't feel like anything to him, but Vincent had already checked Bart's state with the Tree of Wisdom. Name, Bart, species, beech tree level trait, great leader, status growing 0%. Bart's leader trait had upgraded to great leader. Vincent didn't know what that meant, only that something special had changed. "There really isn't any difference?" he asked, looking up. "Pay attention. Feel it." Bart frowned as if concentrating. A few seconds later, he said awkwardly, "Master, Bart is hungry." Vincent had no choice but to feed him some more magic. It was the first Tuesday of December, more than a week since Bart had gained the Great Leader trait, and still there was no obvious progress. Bart's clumsy manner hardly matched the grand title. Sirius Black was still missing, and the Ministry Aurors were still camped around Hogwarts, patrolling the castle now and then. Morning, in the Great Hall. Harry was listlessly eating breakfast with his friends. Even though a month had passed, thinking about the Quidditch match they'd lost still left him a little down. "Cheer up, Harry," Ron said between mouthfuls of sausage. "It's only one match. We're not out of the running yet. Who's next?" "Slytherin," Hermione said, looking up from her book. "Ah, right," Ron said. "We can't lose to Slytherin. Malfoy's their weak link." Harry forced a smile. He had lost to Cedric, true, but he was confident he could beat Malfoy easily. The thought cheerfully eased his mood. Vincent had told him not to overthink a temporary defeat, and Harry was trying to take that advice to heart. "Have you finished your potions homework?" Hermione put her book down abruptly. "It's due tomorrow." "Not started," Ron said, nonchalant. "You'll help us, right?" Harry looked at Hermione with hopeful eyes. He'd been spending most of his free time on Quidditch training. Since their loss to Hufflepuff, Wood had increased the drills, so homework had slipped. But Hermione shook her head for once, a troubled look on her face. "I haven't finished it either," she said. "I'm still a bit short." Harry and Ron gaped, and Ron's fork clattered onto his plate. You haven't finished? He repeated, incredulous. Hermione Granger hasn't finished her homework. Hermione bit her lip. There are more classes now, and Snape's assignments aren't in the textbooks. Harry nodded. Snape had been acting odd lately, teaching them the wolfsbane potion, something third years shouldn't be covering, and then assigning them a 12-inch-long essay to write. So what do we do, Harry? Ron asked, poking his mashed potatoes with concern. I don't even know what that potion's for. Harry spread his hands helplessly. He could only hope for a late evening miracle with a quill. A commotion broke out at the far end of the Gryffindor table. An outraged voice cut over the din of the Great Hall. 50 points. Do you have any idea what that means? Harry looked up to see Percy standing over George and Fred, furious. Gryffindor had just barely caught up to Slytherin's points. Now you've ruined everything. His ears were red. He didn't even bother to eat. George and Fred kept their heads down, unusually silent. Usually they argued back, but losing 50 points was undeniable. Percy, seeing them quiet, sighed and calmed a little. I'm going to talk to Professor McGonagall, he announced, and left the table. Harry, Hermione, and Ron exchanged glances and moved over to the twins. So, what did you do? Harry asked low. You really lost 50 points? It was last night, George said. Hermione's ears perked up. What did you do last night? Just a normal night stroll, George began. Wait! Ron shot up from his chair. Night stroll? You call that normal? Don't get excited, little Ronnie, Fred said, flashing a helpless look at Ron. It's been ages since we got caught. We're usually very careful. Last night, we were just a bit careless. You should be ashamed, Ron snapped. 50 points isn't nothing. We'll fix it, Fred said, clapping Ron's shoulder. Don't worry, Ronnie, my dear. Don't call me that here, Ron snapped, redder than the twins' hair. Hermione, inexplicably, smiled. She didn't understand why she didn't feel as angry as she thought she should at their losing points. If it had been her, she'd be furious with herself. With the twins, it somehow seemed fitting, as if they were born to get into trouble. After Harry and the others left, George and Fred slumped uselessly onto the table. They pretended not to care, but 50 points was a lot for Gryffindor, and it would take time to make up the deficit. What are we going to do? George asked. There's one thing left, Fred said, standing up. Let's find someone who can help us. Chapter 248, The Lost Map. Meanwhile, in Professor Vincent's office, he was using a delicate magical needle to draw blood from his arm. The needle could automatically find a person's veins and extract blood with pinpoint accuracy. He was doing it to make the growth potion. Vincent kept a large blood bank made up solely of his own blood, but he'd noticed that over time the potency, the metamorphosis potion content, in his stored blood slowly increased. That meant growth potions made from fresh blood were far more effective. After drawing 2 vials, Professor Vincent set them in a small box, a specially made potion container that would keep blood viable for at least 10 years. He poured himself a tall glass of his homemade blood replenisher. Lemon-flavored, sweet and tart, and remarkably refreshing. If he were willing to open a potion drink shop, he thought, he could make a fortune. Or he could sell the recipes. But that would take too much time. Lost in thought, a knock sounded at the door. Come in. He took a slow sip as the door flew open, and Fred and George Weasley burst in like a gale. Professor, they panted, we need your help. Vincent raised an eyebrow and set down his drink. Don't rush, he said. What happened? The map, George blurted out, explaining quickly. We lost the Marauders map last night when we were out after curfew. Vincent was silent for a moment, then exhaled slowly. All right, I'll pretend I didn't hear about your night out, but how did you lose it? We don't know, Fred said miserably. It just vanished. When we needed it, the map was gone. Vincent stroked his chin. No clues? Then there's not much I can do. The twins exchanged a helpless look. If they couldn't say when or how it had gone missing, finding it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Professor, George asked, scratching his head, do you have any spells or items that can track magical objects? Of course not, Vincent said dryly, almost laughing. If he had such a thing, he would have caught Sirius Black long ago. That's a shame. Disappointment washed over the twins' faces. Losing the map meant their night excursions and pranks would take a serious hit. Vincent watched them slump and then, softening, added, I can ask around for you. But, He raised a finger. Don't get your hopes up. All right, at least that's something. Thanks, Professor Vincent. They took their leave. After they were gone, Vincent sat back, thoughtful. The Marauder's map being truly lost was unexpected. It might have been taken by another student, or perhaps by Black. He frowned at the thought, then pushed it aside. The term's last week was already busy enough. Outside, snow fell in thick flakes, covering the castle in a blanket of white. The blizzard had not dampened the students' spirits. Hogsmeade Open Day had arrived. On Saturday morning, bundles of students left the school gates for the village. Harry, Ron, and Hermione did the same, wrapped in scarves and heavy robes. On the Gryffindor Tower stairs, they ran into Fred and George. "Hello, Ronnykins," the twins said, flanking Ron and looping an arm over each of his shoulders. For some reason, Ronnykins had become their pet name for him. "Don't call me that, please," Ron protested. "We're going to Hogsmeade." "What a coincidence," George said with a grin. "So are we." Hermione glanced at the trio's light layering. "You should wear thicker robes," she warned. "It's snowing, and Hogsmeade is a walk from here." "It's fine. We have a secret weapon," Fred said with a casual shrug. "Oh, it's getting late. Bye." They started off in the opposite direction. Harry and Hermione watched them go. "Where are they going?" Hermione asked. "Aren't they heading to Hogsmeade?" "Let's follow them and see." Ron decided they might be up to something. "We shouldn't spy on people," Hermione began, but she followed anyway. They trailed the twins down flights of stairs and winding corridors until Fred and George stopped before a statue of a one-eyed witch clutching a walking stick. The trio hid around a nearby corner. Hermione muttered that it wasn't a good habit, but her feet stayed glued to the hallway. George whispered something and tapped the witch statue. A hidden seam opened, revealing a dark, gaping hole. "Ha!" Ron burst out from his hiding place. "I caught you!" The twins spun around, startled, and visibly relaxed when they saw Harry and his friends. "Quiet, Ronnykins," George hissed. "Don't let anyone else find out." Harry stepped forward and peered into the opening. "What is it?" "A passage," Fred explained. "It leads to Honeydukes in Hogsmeade." "I never knew Hogwarts had a passage like this," Hermione said, astonished. "You'd be surprised how much you don't know about Hogwarts," George said proudly. "This is just one of the secret passages we know." Ron's eyes lit up. "What other ones?" "We can't tell you that," Fred said with a sly smile. "Even if you are our dearest Ronnykins, perhaps you should try following us again sometime." The twins led Harry and his two friends into the secret passage. After sliding for a while, they arrived at a narrow, low tunnel that barely fit two people side by side. George and Fred went first, Harry and his friends close behind. "See? It's a pain without the map," Fred muttered to George. "Back then, we'd never have been followed, least of all by Ron." "We'll have to be more careful from now on," George agreed. Since they'd lost the Marauder's map, the Weasleys felt oddly unmoored. They'd been used to wandering Hogwarts at night like it was their backyard. Losing that freedom was a small setback, but it wasn't enough to stop them. The passage twisted and the floor was uneven. After nearly half an hour of crawling, Harry and his friends lost sight of the twins. "How much farther?" Ron panted, leaning against the damp wall. "We've been walking a long time," Hermione said, wiping sweat from her brow. "Maybe this wasn't the best route." "Just a little farther," Harry said, turning to them. "We should be almost there." "Aren't you tired?" Ron asked, puzzled. Harry shook his head. "I used magic," he replied calmly. Hermione noticed Harry had been holding his wand the whole time. "What charm?" she asked. "I don't know a spell that helps you walk." "You levitate your shoes," Harry explained. "You'll feel a lot lighter." "Oh," Ron brightened, drew his wand, and pointed at his shoes. "Wingardium Leviosa." 3 seconds later, Harry and Hermione watched Ron hanging upside down in the air and sighed together. "You've got to practice the wrist motion," Harry said, and with a flick, he removed the charm. Ron rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. After another half hour, they finally came to a stairway up. After climbing what felt like hundreds of steps, they surfaced into a cellar-like space. The twins were sitting on a large crate, grinning. "You're slow," Fred said. They led the others through 2 more doors and a staircase, and then arrived inside Honeydukes. "You should have warned us this route was brutal," Ron complained, massaging his waist. "We wouldn't have had to suffer so much." "Oh, come on, little Ronnie," Fred teased, ruffling Ron's hair. It was just a little test. Look at Harry. No complaints. Want some candy? Ron recoiled when Fred produced a handful of dark, lumpy beans. No thanks, he waved. Fred laughed and tucked them away. They were trick sweets that turned into tiny spiders when bitten. Fred enjoyed teasing Ron, and as a mischievous older brother, he always remembered what he claimed were Ron's favorite things. After saying goodbye to the twins, the three friends spent the morning exploring Hogsmeade. Even though they'd been there before, the little village still felt fresh and full of wonder. In the afternoon, they went to the Three Broomsticks as usual, only to find it packed. The crowd forced them to change plans. They returned to Honeyduke's, where there were plenty of sweets and room to breathe. At the Three Broomsticks, Professor Vincent sat with Professor Lupin and Tonks at a small table. "When did you two get so close?" Vincent asked, surprised. In the usual timeline, Tonks and Lupin hadn't been so friendly so fast. Vincent hadn't expected them to be chatting like old friends. Lupin offered an awkward smile. He didn't really know how it had happened either. Tonks laughed and took a sip of butterbeer. "Professor Lupin's an interesting person," she said. "By the way, Professor Vincent, how's that little cutie you mentioned from the Forbidden Forest?" "Doing well," Vincent replied succinctly. Aside from being a bit goofy, Bart had no serious problems. "I'll bring him by sometime," Vincent added. Lupin nodded without pressing for details. Tonks leaned back. "Aren't you an Auror at the Ministry?" Vincent asked. "Why are you here?" "Aurors get holidays too," she said with a wink, "and someone else is on shift." They laughed. "Dementors are trouble," Vincent added, looking a little stern. "They don't get paid and they don't sleep," Tonks said casually. "All they need is a bit of misery. For most people, they're still dangerous." Vincent nodded. Aurors had been patrolling Hogwarts daily in recent weeks, a measure Dumbledore tolerated despite its effect on the students' studies. Compared to Dementors, Vincent thought, Aurors were the lesser evil. As they talked, familiar faces came into the pub. Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, Hagrid, and Minister Fudge. The minister made a beeline for the bar and exchanged greetings with Madame Rosmerta. From the corner where they sat, the three could see but not hear everything. Madame Rosmerta's relaxed smile suggested small talk rather than crisis. "Minister Fudge has been run off his feet lately," Tonks observed, watching him. "Ever since those Dementors at Hogwarts were hurt, he's had to deal with a lot of complaints." "So what happened to the Dementors?" Lupin asked, curious. He knew they'd been sent back to Azkaban, but not the details. "Who knows?" Tonks shrugged. "No one at the Ministry seems to know for sure. If I had to guess, Dumbledore's involved." Vincent took a slow sip of butterbeer and said nothing. When Minister Fudge moved away from the bar and began talking with McGonagall, his eyes briefly met Vincent's. The minister's smile stiffened for a heartbeat, just enough for Vincent to notice. The effect was subtle, but it made clear that Fudge had some reservations about him. Chapter 250, The Passing Auror Night, fell slowly over Hogsmeade, and the last students drifted out of the Three Broomsticks. Vincent had lost count of how many butterbeers he'd had. Tonks was lively, at least that was his impression, and by the end of the afternoon they had almost become friends. From Lupin, Vincent had heard about Tonks' encounter on the night of the full moon. It was clear there was some odd fate connecting the two. He had assumed Lupin would spend those nights quietly in the Shrieking Shack, not wandering into the Forbidden Forest. "Tonks, you've got half an hour before your shift," a voice interrupted. Vincent looked up. A middle-aged man with thinning hair and tired eyes stood in the doorway, watching them. "Oh, all right, Mr. Jamieson," Tonks said, immediately obedient. "Would you like a butterbeer?" Mr. Jamieson sat beside her and inclined his head to Vincent and Lupin. "Sean Jamieson, Ministry of Magic," he said. "Good evening, professors. Tonks has been causing you trouble. She's still learning." Vincent noticed that while Jamieson looked worn, his gaze never stopped taking in the room. He had the habits of a veteran Auror. After one butterbeer, he was on his feet again and left without fuss. "He's got a child to care for," Tonks said in a softer voice once he'd gone. "He's a single father. That's why the boss lets him take it easy over the holidays." Vincent didn't pry. Some things weren't for idle gossip. "It'll be easier after this period," Tonks said, stretching. "After Christmas, those Dementors will come back." "After Christmas?" Vincent echoed. You didn't know? Tonks seemed surprised, then laughed. I thought everyone knew. Didn't Dumbledore tell you? Well, we do now, Vincent said. He hadn't expected the Dementors to regroup so quickly. From what he'd heard, when the creatures gathered like that, it was rarely at the Ministry's bidding, more often their own doing. Tonks blinked and waved. I probably shouldn't have said anything. I have to go on duty. She hurried out of the pub. Vincent looked at Lupin. She's an interesting one, he said. Lupin only nodded, a faint smile. Vincent caught himself smiling too. Lupin didn't yet know how much Tonks might come to matter later. He suspected the path between two people could twist in surprising ways. For now, Hogsmeade Open Day ended and the Christmas holidays began. Hogwarts felt quieter than usual. Few students stayed for the holidays, but Harry, Ron, and Hermione were among those who did. Harry was lucky to have his two friends. Otherwise, he would have faced Christmas alone. He never seriously considered going back to the Dursleys. Vincent, by contrast, always went to the United States to visit family at Christmas. If he hadn't, he might have spent the holidays with his professor, which would have been welcome too. The Great Hall had been decked out in holly and mistletoe, a dozen Christmas trees standing guard around the room. After a hearty breakfast provided by the house elves, the trio headed to the courtyard. Snow fell hard, laughter filled the air. Harry cast a warming charm over his clothes and shoes, and a snowball fight quickly broke out. They had agreed, at least at first, not to use wands, but the line slipped, as it always does. Ordinary snowballs began to curve and speed unnaturally, spells flew, and the cheerful clatter of shield charms rose and fell. Then an accident happened. A huge snowball, as if with a will of its own, veered off, described a strange arc through the air, and struck a figure passing along the corridor. The three of them stopped and ran over. The man, middle-aged and balding, stood with a scrap of parchment in his hand. He brushed the snow from his coat, calm and unruffled. "I'm fine, child," he said. "Be more careful next time." He left without another word. "That was odd," Ron muttered. "I've never seen him before." "He's probably one of the Ministry Aurors," Hermione said. "They're stationed here at Hogwarts right now. Haven't you forgotten?" "Right," Ron said. "They don't exactly look like heroes all the time." Students at Hogwarts had at least heard the name Auror. Becoming one required top marks at the NEWT level and a toughness most witches and wizards didn't have. Harry watched the man's retreating back for a moment. He'd had the impression the man had been looking at him a little while ago. Harry forced himself not to worry. Being stared at was part of being the boy who lived. The snow picked up and the courtyard grew colder, so the three of them called it quits and headed back to the common room. Harry and Ron collapsed onto a sofa while Hermione produced a thick book and began to read. "Come on, it's Christmas," Ron complained. "Put the book down and join us." Hermione rolled her eyes. "Don't forget Professor Snape's potions homework. He gave us a paper on the wolfsbane potion. He chewed you both out about it." They had, in fact, not finished the essay on the wolfsbane potion. Harry had written a very long paper, 12 inches of parchment, but it was riddled with gaps and shaky logic. Ron's effort had been little better. Except for Hermione, most of them had been on the receiving end of Snape's displeasure. "Wolfsbane potion," Ron moaned, covering his eyes. "Why are we even learning this stuff?" Harry shrugged. Snape always had a way of making things harder than they needed to be. Chapter 251, Christmas Day. Christmas morning arrived sooner than Harry expected. He sat on the edge of his four-poster bed, staring at the snow falling outside the frosted window. Hogwarts felt quieter than usual. The castle had been mostly empty all week. Beyond Professor Vincent, Harry had only seen a single first-year Gryffindor and a Ministry Auror who ended up the target of a stray snowball. Still, with Ron and the others around, he didn't feel lonely, and he was grateful for that. Loneliness, he knew, could be a hard thing to bear. He couldn't help but think of the Christmases at the Dursleys. The image came to him as if through a crack in a closed door. Dudley tearing open presents, buried by wrapping paper, while Uncle Vernon laughed in his armchair and Aunt Petunia clicked away with her camera, capturing Dudley's greedy face. Harry himself had curled up in the dark cupboard under the stairs, counting the cracks in the ceiling, occasionally being tossed Dudley's old socks or a melted sticky chocolate from Uncle Vernon's office. He shook his head. Vincent had been right. You live forward, not backward. Ron was still asleep, so Harry didn't wake him. He crossed to the window, scooped Gollum out of the flower pot, and cradled him. "You look heavier," he murmured. Gollum blinked, shook himself, and with surprising agility leapt onto Harry's rumpled hair. "Hey, don't do that," Harry said, reaching up. Gollum darted away and settled back on his head. Harry laughed and gave in. Lately, Gollum favored that spot. Settled with Gollum balancing on his head, Harry opened a book on ancient runes. Pale sunlight filtered through the frost onto the page, lending the dormitory a smear of warmth. "Harry?" Ron's voice came from behind after a while. Harry glanced back to see him sitting up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What are you doing?" Ron mumbled, still half asleep. "Studying." Ron froze, eyes widening. "Are you Hermione?" he blurted, then shot to his feet as if the idea finally registered. His gaze dropped to the foot of the bed and brightened. "Presents." Harry followed the look and found that somehow a pile of brightly wrapped parcels had appeared by their beds. The two of them immediately abandoned their tasks and started tearing into them. Mrs. Weasley's package came first. A knitted scarlet sweater, lion embroidered on the front, and a stack of mince pies and pastries that smelled unmistakably of the burrow. Hagrid's parcel, Professor Lupin's. Each gift brought its own warm, familiar touch. The last package Harry opened contained a large bag of Honeyduke sweets. "These are limited edition," Ron said, eyes shining. "Someone must have spent a fortune on these. Who sent them?" Harry looked for a note but found none. "No idea," he admitted. "Maybe a professor?" "Professor Vincent?" Ron suggested after a beat. It was the only name that came to mind. Harry shrugged, and the two of them, each with a tower of empty wrapping around them, headed down to the common room. They froze midway through the doorway. An unexpected figure lounged on the big sofa, a slice of pumpkin pie on his plate and a satisfied smile on his face. "Professor?" Harry said, pleasantly surprised. "Hello, boys," Professor Vincent called, waving. "Merry Christmas." He looked at home in the common room, as if he had every right to the pie he'd snatched from the kitchens. "I thought you were in the United States," Harry said, crossing to him. "Did you cut your trip short?" Vincent set his fork down. "My family had to cancel their plans, so I came back. I didn't want to miss the Hogwarts feast." "The feast isn't until noon," Ron pointed out, eyeing two small packages on the table beside Vincent. "Are those?" "Your presents. Hermione's was delivered by my owl earlier," Vincent said, pushing one of the smaller parcels toward Ron and the other toward Harry. "Merry Christmas." Ron blinked, surprised. "You got me something?" Vincent smiled. "Of course. Now open them." Ron peeled back the paper to reveal a gold-foiled invitation to the magical menagerie in Diagon Alley, printed with the promise that the bearer could choose a free pet from the shop. He stared at it, stunned, and then met Vincent's eyes. "I think you'll find that useful," the professor said softly. Harry could see Ron swallow at some memory the gift touched, and he didn't press. Harry opened his own package. Inside were two small vials, one a bright, shimmering gold, the other a murky black. Vincent tapped the golden bottle with a proud look. "Felix Felicis, a draught of luck, a few hours of good fortune. I brewed this myself. It was about time I perfected a batch." Harry smiled, grateful. He was about to ask about the dark vial when Gollum, from his perch on Harry's head, lunged forward with blinding speed and gulped the black liquid, bottle and all. "No, Gollum, no!" Harry scrambled to stop him, but it was too late. The small bottle hit the back of Gollum's throat and disappeared. Vincent waved a hand, unperturbed. "It's fine, Harry. That one was intended for Gollum anyway." Harry let out a laugh that was more like a relieved exhale and sat back down, Gollum burbling contentedly on his hair. The common room filled with the warm, comfortable sounds of people at ease, the sort of Christmas morning Harry had finally come to expect. Chapter 252, after the Christmas feast ended. When Vincent thought of Gollum, he realized he hadn't paid attention to the little creature for a long time. He had the Tree of Wisdom run an analysis. Name, Gollum. Type, biting cabbage, level 3 characteristics. Gigantification, energy accumulation. Status growing, 33%. Vincent raised an eyebrow. Gollum had undergone a growth spurt while he wasn't watching and gained a new trait, energy accumulation. That was easy to understand. It meant Gollum could store energy in its body. Since gigantification drained huge amounts of power, this trait neatly compensated for that weakness. It also explained Gollum's recent drowsiness. It must have been accumulating energy. After everyone received their gifts, Vincent stayed in the common room talking with the children. Hogwarts was especially quiet at this time, and he had nowhere else to go. During the conversation, Harry mentioned a large package from Honeydukes he had received. Vincent suspected it might have come from Black. In the original timeline, Black had given Harry a firebolt, but now Vincent had beaten him to it. Hermione soon joined them in the Gryffindor common room, wearing the bright red knitted hat Vincent had given her. He had even enchanted it to stay warm permanently. At noon, Vincent took the three little ones and the first year who remained at school down to the Great Hall. The Great Hall was alive with Christmas. Tall trees, glittering decorations, icicles, and golden bells hung from the ceiling. As they entered, Dumbledore waved from across the room. "Merry Christmas! Come on, there aren't many of us." Vincent looked over and saw only one large table set near Dumbledore, already full of people, the last to arrive. To his surprise, he didn't recognize several faces. Tonks was among them, so he guessed they were Aurors. "Ah, this Christmas is a bit different," Dumbledore said cheerfully. "The Auror team from the Ministry of Magic will be spending the day with us." The Aurors nodded. Their expressions carried the familiar alertness and efficiency of their line of work. After Vincent took his seat, Tonks leaned over. "You're late, Professor Vincent. Tonks," a tall, middle-aged Auror hissed. Tonks stuck out her tongue and fell silent. Vincent shrugged inwardly. The Aurors didn't seem very friendly, and Tonks was probably the exception. Dumbledore chuckled and smoothed things over. "We can relax a bit. It's Christmas after all. Oh, where are my crackers?" McGonagall handed Dumbledore a cracker, and he pushed it across to Vincent. Vincent hesitated, then grabbed the other end and pulled. Pop! Golden sparks burst, and a woman's wizard hat appeared in his hand. Vincent put the ridiculous hat on with good humor, and several students burst out laughing. "Actually, that was the hat I had prepared for myself," Dumbledore said with a chuckle. "Never mind. Eat, everyone." The rest of the feast passed pleasantly. Some Aurors loosened up and chatted with the professors. The students kept their heads down and ate. During a lull, Hermione leaned into Harry's ear. "Remember the Auror we hit with a snowball on the first day of the holidays? What about him?" "He's not here." Harry scanned the Aurors. The middle-aged man with thinning hair was indeed absent. "Maybe he went home for Christmas," Harry said casually. "Not that strange. What are you going to do?" "I just wanted to apologize to him again," Hermione said. "No need," Ron mumbled with his mouth full of sausage. "Aurors won't care. Besides, we still don't know who threw that snowball." "All right, you're right," Hermione conceded. About an hour and a half later, the Aurors rose as a group to leave. Even on Christmas, they had patrols to run. Half an hour after that, students and most professors drifted out of the Great Hall. Vincent meant to go too, but Lupin asked him to stay a little longer after the feast. Soon only Dumbledore, Lupin, Professor McGonagall, and Vincent remained. "Come, it's time," Dumbledore said, rising and walking toward the corridor. Vincent was puzzled, but followed Lupin and McGonagall. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To another place to celebrate," Lupin replied quietly. Vincent's bewilderment deepened as Dumbledore led them up a flight of stairs to the end of a second-floor corridor. Dumbledore tapped the wall, and a plain wooden door materialized. The doorknob was a small statue of a yawning angel. It perked up when someone approached and announced in a crisp voice, "Welcome to," before Dumbledore gently pressed a finger to its lips. "Secrecy measures, you know," Dumbledore said with a wink, and pushed open the door. Inside was a cozy sitting room, a small Christmas tree, 2 sofas, a coffee table strewn with wizard chess pieces. A fire crackled in the hearth. On one sofa, a short, stout man lay dozing, his chest rising and falling. It could only be Peter. "We're here to spend Christmas with Peter," Lupin said softly. "He's been hiding out here lately, hardly going out. Poor Peter." Vincent sat opposite him, relieved it wasn't something dark or sinister. From an outside perspective, Peter did look pitiful. They settled in, and perhaps sensing company, Peter opened his eyes. He blinked at the 4 pairs of faces staring back, and was so startled he tumbled off the sofa. Chapter 253, Dumbledore's Suspicions. Merlin's beard, Peter exclaimed, scrambling to his feet, eyes wide. You're here for what? Remus smiled gently. Merry Christmas, Peter. Peter's face twitched. When he saw that no one was moving toward him, he awkwardly rubbed his hands together. Oh, I'm really surprised. A little surprised, Peter, Dumbledore said with a smile, waving his wand. Suddenly a great deal of food appeared on the table. I had the house elves prepare some extra. Peter glanced at the spread and visibly relaxed. Vincent chuckled inwardly. Peter must have been scared half to death by this surprise. He could picture Peter's feelings. As the real betrayer, Peter lived in constant fear and torment. That fear would not end until the truth came out. Peter didn't immediately touch the food. He trembled as he looked at Dumbledore. Professor, Black. Any news of Black? Dumbledore shook his head. Peter's expression dimmed. He was terrified Black might expose him after capture, and equally afraid Black might come for revenge. Neither outcome was good. Don't worry, Peter, Professor McGonagall said softly. The Aurors are stationed at Hogwarts. It's very safe here. I was thinking, Peter fidgeted, his voice weak. Maybe I should leave Britain? Then Black definitely won't find me. Dumbledore's blue eyes narrowed slightly. That's one option, Peter, but I still think you should stay at Hogwarts. Hogwarts is the safest place for you. All right, Peter murmured, voice trailing as his gaze wandered. You'll protect me, Peter. No one else knows you're hiding here, and Black won't find you. Remus patted his shoulder and handed him a plate of sausages. Trust us, okay? Peter took the plate and, as if about to cry, whispered, Thank you, Remus. Vincent understood then. Peter wanted desperately to leave Hogwarts, but Dumbledore wouldn't allow it. In effect, Dumbledore had placed Peter under house arrest. While everyone's attention lingered on Peter, Vincent leaned close to Dumbledore and whispered, You think something's wrong with Peter, don't you? Dumbledore glanced at him and said casually, I've noticed a few details recently I hadn't seen before. So? Vincent pressed. Dumbledore only smiled faintly and shook his head. Still, Vincent had the gist. He looked back at Peter and felt as if a bright danger sign hovered above him. Soon the break ended. It had not been a pleasant Christmas dinner. Peter had been on edge the whole time, eating only a few bites. After a while, the group left Peter's hiding place. Watching the wooden door slide back into the wall, Vincent felt a little moved. He had never known a hidden room was tucked away there. Hogwarts' secrets truly were inexhaustible. Dumbledore and McGonagall left first. In the corridor, only Vincent and Remus lingered. Remus stared out at the darkening sky and sighed slowly. When will this all be over? As Peter's friend, he cared about him deeply. I think soon, Vincent replied casually. Black can't hide forever. He'll show himself when the time is right. I hope so, Remus said. As they parted, Vincent handed Remus a small bottle of dark golden liquid. This is the third version of the purification potion, Vincent finished. Drink it at the next full moon. Remus took the bottle at once. The potion is already good enough. I can control myself now. Not enough, Vincent said, shaking his head. Control isn't the ultimate goal. Mastery is. All right, you're right, Remus conceded. If Vincent wanted to keep researching, he would cooperate. Maybe someday they would rid him of the werewolf gene entirely. Remus wanted nothing more than to be normal. The day after Christmas, the break continued. In the courtyard, Harry and Ron were messing with the firebolt. Ron had been coveting the finest broom in the world for ages. School rules forbade students from flying without permission on school grounds, but it was the holidays and no professor was likely to interfere. The firebolt's very fast, Harry warned as Ron mounted the broom. You have to hold on tight. This isn't like the brooms from flying class. Got it, Ron said, trembling with excitement. No problem. A whoosh filled the air before he could finish. With a shout, Ron shot straight up. Be careful, Harry yelled from below. Terrified Ron might come down headfirst. If Ron got hurt, it would be bad. Worse if the firebolt were damaged. Fortunately, Ron adapted quickly. After a few harried moments, he began to control the broom, circling awkwardly with his red hair flying in the cold wind and a grin spreading across his face. This is awesome, he cried. A window on the third floor burst open. Filch's head poked out, and he roared. You two! What do you think you're doing? Oh no, Ron thought, and clumsily steered the firebolt to land beside Harry. Run! Harry grabbed the broom and pulled Ron, and they sprinted away. After several frantic minutes, they hid inside an empty classroom. The exertion roused Gollum, who had been hiding in Harry's hair, and it squirmed restlessly. "We should be safe now," Ron panted, dropping into a chair and clutching his chest. Harry nodded. Filch wasn't easy to deal with, but as long as they hadn't been caught, they weren't in trouble. At least, not yet. Chapter 254, Sean Jamieson. "How's the firebolt?" Harry asked, trying to sound casual. "It's brilliant," Ron said, eyes shining. "More responsive than any broom I've ever ridden." His voice dropped. "Shame I'm not a Quidditch player." "You could have some confidence," Harry said, patting Ron on the shoulder. "You flew really well just now. I bet I wasn't much better the first time I rode a firebolt either." "Thanks, mate." Ron's ears flushed a little. He knew he could never match Harry, not when Harry was Professor McGonagall's chosen seeker, but maybe he could try out for Gryffindor next year. They checked that Filch wasn't nearby and slipped out of the empty classroom, walking side by side toward the common room. Something felt off to Harry all day. As they turned a corner, he realized aloud, "We haven't seen Hermione today. Where is she?" "Where do you think?" Ron shrugged. "Probably in the library as usual. I invited her to try the firebolt this morning. She said she wasn't interested. Can you imagine? Not wanting to see a firebolt." Harry nodded. Who didn't want to see a firebolt was abnormal. Footsteps hurried somewhere ahead. Both boys froze, holding their breath. Harry even tried to hide the firebolt behind him, though it wouldn't matter if someone caught sight of it. When the figure rounded the bend, they relaxed. It wasn't Filch at all, but a bald, middle-aged man, the Auror they'd hit with snowballs at the start of the holiday. "Good morning, sir," Harry said politely. The man ignored them and kept walking without expression. Harry and Ron exchanged puzzled looks. "That's odd," Ron whispered. "He looks in a foul mood." "He didn't come to the feast yesterday either," Harry said. "Maybe he's on some secret mission," Ron said with a shrug. "Aurors do that." Harry's mind ticked. "Let's follow him." He lowered his voice and kept his eyes on the Auror's retreating back. Ron blinked. "Are you mad? Follow an Auror?" "He's acting strange," Harry insisted. "Missing the feast, rushing around. I can't explain it, but something's wrong." Ron hesitated, then sighed. "All right, but if we get caught, we'll say we're lost." They tailed him at a discreet distance. The Auror walked quickly, then abruptly stopped in the middle of the corridor. Harry and Ron dove behind a suit of armor. The man seemed oblivious to them. He fished a slip of parchment from his cloak and glanced at it. Before they could think what he was doing, he folded the paper away and darted off, vanishing around the corridor's bend. "Why's he running?" Ron muttered, ruffling his hair. Harry felt a cold knot of unease. Meanwhile, much later and in a different part of the castle, Vincent sat in his office wrestling with plans for his Care of Magical Creatures lessons. A fire salamander felt too tame. Other creatures he fancied were dangerously ill-suited for first-term students. As he pondered, something, oddly enough a devil's snare, tapped his shoulder and, in an almost ridiculous moment, presented him with an alarm clock. "Oh, lunchtime already? Thanks for the reminder," he said, standing. The house elves had been putting special care into meals the past few days. Vincent had come to enjoy their efforts. On his way to the Great Hall, he spotted a not-quite-familiar face walking toward him. "Hello, Mr. Jamieson," Vincent called, friendly. "Are you heading to the hall? The food at Hogwarts is excellent." The man was Sean Jamieson, the one he'd met during Hogsmeade Open Day. But Jamieson's face was flushed, and he looked out of breath, as if he'd been running. "No, thank you," Jamieson said curtly, then hurried past him. Vincent froze. Something about the man's manner set his teeth on edge. Tonks had mentioned that Jamieson would be going home for the Christmas holiday to care for his child. That meant Jamieson shouldn't be at Hogwarts at all. This was important. Vincent broke into a run and, wand sliding into his hand, called, "Wait!" The man must have realized he'd been seen. He started running too. Vincent closed the distance, wand already raised. "Stop!" The man spun, panic in his eyes, and pointed a wand back at Vincent. "What are you doing? Whoever you are, you don't point a wand at an Auror." At that moment, the corridor window shattered. Glass sprayed inward, and a dark shape hurtled through the opening. Lay, a large, winged creature, slammed into the man with astonishing speed. Lay's claws pinned him to the floor, and its beak hovered inches from his throat. The man screamed. His wand skittered away across the flagstones. Good job, Lay. Vincent stepped forward, wand level at the man. But don't hurt him. Lay released, and once it knew the man couldn't struggle away, it hopped back, rubbing its head against Vincent's shoulder like a dog. Vincent studied the man on the ground. Who are you exactly? He asked, his voice steady though his jaw tightened. He already had an idea, but protocol required him to ask. I'm with the Ministry of Magic, Auror Office. You can't assault an active Auror. The man insisted, struggling to rise. Lay gave a high, piercing shriek. The sound froze the man mid-effort. He flinched and sank back down. Vincent allowed himself a short, humorless laugh. The imposter was still trying to maintain the act, even as he failed. Save it, Vincent said. He glanced toward the shattered window and then at the discarded wand. Ministry will be the ones to sort this out. Don't move. Chapter 255, Black, Arrested. All right, I hope I still remember how to cast this one. Vincent drew a circle in the air with his wand and intoned an obscure charm. The tip of his wand flared with blue light that spread like ripples. The false face he'd been wearing, the one that made him look like Jamison, warped and slid away, the outline of his body shifting until the expected figure stood before him. Hello, Sirius Black, Vincent said with a smile. Never expected we'd meet under these circumstances. Black was not the wild-eyed wreck the Daily Prophet portraits made him out to be. His clothes were ill-fitting, but a sharp light burned in his eyes. The moment he saw the man in front of him, he realized his disguise had been blown. He let out a weary sigh. I suppose you're not going to let me go quietly. Glad you still have your wits about you, Vincent replied, keeping his wand trained on him. Black raised his hands, but his gaze darted around the room. His hope drained when Devil's Snare delicately but firmly wound itself around the wand lying on the floor. Without a wand, he stood no chance against an adult wizard. Worse, a fierce tiger watched him from the side. Vincent feigned thoughtfulness. By the book, I should give you a chance to speak. Anything you'd like to say, Mr. Black? Let me see Dumbledore, Black said hoarsely. As you wish. Vincent nodded all too willingly. With Peter still alive, Black had no choice but to reveal the truth if he wanted to be believed. 10 minutes later, they were in the empty dining hall. Vincent and Black sat across from one another, with a full tray between them. The only sound was the crisp clink of cutlery. Because they had arrived early, the hall belonged to them alone. Black watched Vincent calmly eating and said numbly, Aren't you going to take me to Dumbledore now? Oh, one moment, Mr. Black. Vincent glanced up and sipped his coffee. Lunch first. Today's food is particularly good. Try the raspberry pie. He gestured to the slice sitting in front of Black. Black hesitated. He hadn't had a proper meal in a long time, but at the moment he had no appetite. You don't seem surprised, he said dryly. Aren't you afraid I'll get away? Vincent shrugged while cutting a piece of steak with deliberate calm. First, you don't have a wand. Second, even if you did, you couldn't beat me. Black gave a bitter, defeated smile. Like a fish on a chopping block, he was at the mercy of the man opposite him. With a resigned motion, he picked up his fork and began to eat. When they finished, Vincent led him up toward the headmaster's office. Black's steps grew heavier. His knuckles were white on his cloak. Don't worry, Mr. Black, Vincent observed casually as they approached the gargoyle guarding the office. You'll probably be sent back to Azkaban. There's a small chance of execution. Hardly matters, right? Black said nothing. They stopped in front of the ugly stone gargoyle. Password, Vincent pretended to think. Fizzing Whizbees. The gargoyle jumped aside, revealing the spiral stairs. Black drew a deep breath and followed him up. The office door opened automatically. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, leisurely dropping a sugar cube into his teacup. The cube slipped from his fingers when he noticed them. His expression turned to surprise. Look who I've brought, Vincent said, pushing Black a step forward. Black did not waste time. Professor Dumbledore. Peter was the traitor back then, and he's here at Hogwarts now. Dumbledore's features registered astonishment. He hadn't expected this man to appear in his office, and he certainly hadn't expected such a claim. He took a moment to compose himself, then rose and fixed Black with a steady look. Explain. Black poured it out quickly. 12 years ago, he had secretly passed the Secret Keeper's role to Peter, not keeping it for himself, as everyone assumed. The intention had been to mislead Voldemort, but Peter had long since secretly joined the Dark Lord. Dumbledore listened, tapping his fingers on the desk, then asked measuredly, "Then why are you here? What do you intend to do?" A flare of anger lit Black's face. "For revenge." His voice trembled. "I saw it in the prophet. The rat from the Weasleys was Peter. He's an animagus. I can't be mistaken." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. "Do you intend to kill Peter?" Black nodded without hesitation. "Why should he live? He betrayed James and Lily. He deserves to die." For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. No matter the provocation, death is always weighty. Dumbledore walked around his desk and stood in front of Black, looking him calmly in the eye. "I don't think that would be wise, Black. If Peter dies now, you won't be able to prove what you claim." "I don't care," Black snapped. Vincent stood silently to the side, watching. From a rational perspective, Black sneaking into Hogwarts to kill Peter was madness, but people are not always rational. Dumbledore's voice grew serious. "One more question. Why didn't you clear this up 12 years ago?" "No one would even give me a trial," Black answered with a bitter smile. "Peter vanished without a trace back then. How could I prove my innocence? Veritaserum." He shuddered. "Besides, under those Dementors, you couldn't be expected to be rational." Dumbledore didn't reply immediately. His expression was grave. Black's account, though desperate, contained plausibility. He also had his own recent unease about Peter. Perhaps, Dumbledore thought, the truth might indeed be closer to what Black had said. 256. Accident Chapter 26. Unexpected. Actually. Black suddenly lowered his head, his voice growing even hoarser. "One thing is true. I am also one of the murderers who killed James and Lily. It was I who insisted James change the secret keeper from me to Peter. If a tragedy is usually the result of a series of accidents," Dumbledore interrupted gently. "This is not entirely your fault. An accident is an accident. No one can predict it. I hope you can find it in yourself to forgive yourself, Black." "Forgive myself." That was easier said than done. Vincent glanced at Dumbledore's eyes. They say the eyes are the window to the soul. Perhaps it was a cliché, but Dumbledore's calm voice couldn't a trace of sadness that radiated from him. "You are the last person who should be lecturing anyone about forgiveness, Headmaster," Vincent thought. He noticed something else too. Black was not the raving madman the stories made him out to be. He seemed composed, logical. After 12 years tormented by Dementors in Azkaban, losing one's mind might be expected. Keeping one's sanity would be the miracle. "How did you keep from being driven mad by the Dementors?" Vincent asked. "I don't know," Black admitted, shaking his head. "I still remember seeing Peter's face in the Daily Prophet. Everything in my head went blank, and there was only one thought, to kill him." That made Vincent uneasy. He remembered how unclear Black's mind had been when he first arrived, but when had he started to steady? For a brief instant, Vincent's mind flashed to the strange tree in the Forbidden Forest, something he chose not to mention. Black went on, describing his escape, swimming across the North Sea in a storm, stripping a set of clothes off a drunken muggle, acquiring polyjuice potion through unregulated channels, getting the Marauders map from the Weasley twins, and finally exposing himself, which led to his being captured by Vincent. Hearing it, Vincent felt a strange admixture of pity and admiration. Compared to the desperate fugitive of the stories, this Black had been resourceful. If Vincent hadn't intercepted him, Black might really have found and killed Peter at Hogwarts. When Black had finished, Dumbledore asked, "So what are you planning to do now?" "What to do?" "Of course, kill." Black began, then stopped, catching himself. He took a deep breath and a flash of clarity crossed his face. "First, we find Peter. He's hiding with the youngest Weasley as a pet rat." Dumbledore and Vincent exchanged looks. They already knew Scabbers' true identity and that Peter was being kept in a secluded room at Hogwarts. "Don't worry about Peter, Black," Dumbledore said. "I will take care of him. It won't be difficult. Right now I need to write to Fudge. Once the investigation proceeds, the truth will come to light." "Ministry of Magic," Black muttered, his disdain obvious. He held no illusions about the Ministry. When he'd been sent to Azkaban, there had been no trial. Everyone had assumed he was the murderer. That kind of rush to judgment made it hard for him to trust them. Still, for now they had to rely on the Ministry to move swiftly. The next few days passed in an uneasy calm. Dumbledore and Vincent kept Black's presence secret. It was best not to stir up unnecessary panic until things settled. The headmaster's office received more owls than usual, indicating ripples within the ministry. Yet surprisingly, no one was immediately sent. Tonks did tell Vincent that the ministry had received the news and wanted personnel stationed at Hogwarts indefinitely. The Dementor deployment order had been revoked. Housing Black was temporarily handed to Vincent, which resulted in a large stray dog beginning to follow him around the castle. For safety, Vincent even dyed the dog's fur pink, entirely with Black's supposed consent. Black insisted he had not. The term began, and Hogwarts filled with students again. On the second afternoon after classes resumed, Vincent's office felt warm and cozy. A small herd of fire salamanders flickered in the hearth, each one a different color, the latest stock from the magical creatures shop. Vincent had decided their care would be the subject of his next lesson. The salamanders were always a hit with the students. Roskin, the shopkeeper, was apparently still traveling in France. His assistant looked noticeably more frazzled, as if his hair had thinned. Black idly tossed kindling into the fire, the salamanders scurrying about and their colors reflecting on his face. "Any news of Peter?" he sighed. "It's been nearly half a month." "The ministry will need time to react," Vincent said. "After all, they arrested the wrong man, let an innocent man rot in Azkaban for 12 years, and let the real culprit go free. They won't be able to ignore that." "That's intolerable," Black whispered. "But at least tell me where Peter is." Vincent smiled without answering. Dumbledore had not told Black where Peter was, and he had forbidden Vincent from revealing it. Until the truth was public, anything could be reversed. Dumbledore was willing to trust Black, but how could anyone prove his claim? Not everyone knew what Vincent knew. For now, Black remained under careful watch. There was a knock at the door. Black reacted immediately, flopping to the floor and changing into his animagus form, a large black dog. Vincent flicked his wand, and the animal's fur turned bright pink. "Come in," he called. The door opened slowly under Black's resentful gaze. The next second, Harry appeared in the doorway. "Good afternoon, Professor." Harry slipped into the headmaster's office, and after greeting Vincent, collapsed into the soft sofa as if he were back in his own dormitory. Professor Vincent raised an eyebrow and flicked his wand. A glass of purple drink with tiny violet bubbles drifted toward Harry. "Try this. It's Professor Flitwick's favorite. I've been trying to improve the recipe." Harry looked exhausted. He took a sip, then buried his face in a pillow embroidered with a thunderbird, and without much reaction to the drink, muttered into it, "I just finished potions. Snape docked 10 points from Gryffindor again, because I stirred counterclockwise 3 times when brewing the wakefulness potion. It doesn't even affect the potion." At the mention of Snape, Black by the fireplace suddenly pricked up his ears. His large pink tail thumped into the hearth, where a group of fire salamanders were already frolicking. A blue salamander leapt and clamped down on the tip of the tail. Pfft! Flames flared, bright blue along the tail. "Ow!" Harry and Professor Vincent looked over at the commotion. The big pink dog was struggling to shake the little salamanders off his tail. The sight was absurd enough to be almost comical. Black was inwardly miserable. He couldn't transform back into a man or use a wand while Harry was present. Harry acted first, waving his wand. "Aguamenti!" A precise jet of water doused the burning tail, sending up a curl of steam. Vincent sprang forward in 3 strides, snatched one dying salamander from the hearth, and tossed it back into the fire. "Be careful, Bubble," he scolded. Black blinked in confusion. Bubble? Had Vincent just called him that? When had he gotten a nickname like that? Harry peered at the pink dog, curiosity brightening his face. The animal seemed oddly familiar, though Harry quickly dismissed the feeling. Pink dogs weren't exactly common, so it was probably just a rare breed. "Yes, he's very well behaved. You can cuddle him," Vincent added with a smile. Harry leapt from the sofa and went to the dog's side, rubbing Black's head. Black lay down obediently, making no protest. "Is it a boy or a girl?" Harry asked. Before Harry could get an answer, his messy hair shuddered and Gollum burst out, swelling to the size of Harry's head and lunging at Black's still smoking tail. Gollum sank his teeth into the fur. "Ow!" Harry scooped Gollum up in a panic. The little creature squirmed and grumbled, a tuft of pink hair clamped between its teeth. Be good, Gollum, Harry murmured, trying to pry the fur from the creature's mouth. That's not your snack. Black gave a resigned little human sigh. Today, of all days. Still, being so close to Harry eased him a bit. He was the boy's godfather. He should have looked after him when James and Lily couldn't. The thought left a complicated expression on Black's face. Gollum, apparently satisfied with the fuss, shrank back down and burrowed into Harry's hair, his special hiding place. Professor Vincent watched him with interest and then turned to Harry. I have a suggestion, Harry. You should take Gollum out more. Is something wrong with him? Harry asked, puzzled. He needs to release some energy, Vincent explained. He's been storing too much. It's not good. It wasn't news to Vincent. The Tree of Wisdom had already provided Gollum's status. Name Gollum, biting cabbagery. Characteristics, gigantification, energy accumulation. Status, growing, 35%, energy overflight. Gollum's energy overflow meant he had been hoarding energy for too long. Whatever the long-term effects, the creature had become touchy, hardly ideal. All right, Harry said, nodding. I'll take him for a walk. Gollum, as if understanding, retreated fully into Harry's hair. Because Harry had herbology next, he didn't linger in the headmaster's office. After he left, Black transformed back into a man, though the tips of his hair still retained a faint pink tinge. That was Harry Potter, wasn't it? Black asked, his voice trembling slightly. Who else could it be? Vincent replied. Black drew a steadying breath. He's very much like James. Only in appearance, Professor Vincent said, leaning back. Although I'm not personally acquainted with James Potter, from what I see, Harry is much better in every way. Black said nothing at first. His gaze grew distant. After Harry had lost his parents, as godfather he ought to have done more, and he hadn't. Worry tightened in him. Without guidance, would the boy go astray? It wasn't too late to make amends, Black told himself. Maybe in a few days he could clear his name and present himself to Harry openly. He also felt a flutter of relief that he hadn't found Peter yet. Just as Dumbledore had said, keeping Peter alive might be crucial to clearing Black's name. Before he could dwell further, a silver light shimmered in the air of the headmaster's office. Dumbledore's Phoenix Patronus appeared, and, opening its beak, Dumbledore's voice echoed through the room. Professor Vincent, bring your pet dog to the headmaster's office immediately. The password is the same as last time. The Patronus condensed into a wisp of silver and evaporated. Pet dog, does he mean me? Black asked, pointing at himself with a complicated expression. Let's go, Vincent said without hesitation. If Dumbledore had sent a Patronus, the matter must be important, likely another step forward in the search for Peter, or something that might help Black clear his name. Chapter 258, Visitors from the Ministry of Magic. When Vincent and Black entered the headmaster's office, the sight inside made Vincent frown. A number of people had already gathered there, Professor Dumbledore, Lupin, Peter, Cornelius Fudge, and a tall woman wearing a monocle whom Vincent didn't recognize. Peter was bound with a heavy rope, slumped in a chair, his face pale and his body trembling. Lupin stood beside him, grim and silent. The others maintained serious expressions and spoke in low tones. The moment the door opened, every gaze swung toward the entrance. Afternoon, Vincent said awkwardly, feeling as if he'd walked into a zoo exhibit. The real spectacle, of course, was at his feet. Black, a strangely colored large dog, drew more than a few glances. When Black saw Peter, his fur bristled, but he calmed quickly and didn't rush to transform. Fudge pushed forward, his face hard. Professor Vincent, Albus informed us about Black. That, he swallowed. Where is Black? The air in the office thickened. Peter closed his eyes as if to shut out what he already knew. He recognized the animal as well as anyone. Though the color was wrong, it could only be Sirius Black. Everyone in the room understood what Black's presence implied. The tall woman stepped forward, cool and precise. Professor Vincent, I am Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. We have some evidence, but a formal interrogation and identity verification are still required. Professor Dumbledore said you've been guarding Black. Vincent noticed she held a small bottle of clear liquid, Veritaserum, and that some had already been used. At that moment, the pink-furred dog began to twist and contort. Black could no longer hold the animagus form. To everyone's surprise, he transformed into a thin, strikingly handsome man. his hair somehow retaining that odd pink hue. Vincent raised an eyebrow inwardly. Transforming in front of so many people wasn't wise. He was, after all, now an illegal animagus. Changing so openly only added to the trouble. Serious. Lupin's voice sounded far away. He hadn't expected a reunion like this, and it wasn't the time for old friends to reminisce. Fudge went ashen at the sight of Black, and even Bones's composed face showed a flicker of feeling. "Mr. Black," Bones said coldly, "we will be taking you into custody. You are to be detained at the ministry until the investigation is complete." Black's eyes fixed on Peter, hatred barely contained. "What about this traitor?" he spat. "Will you execute him?" Peter made a sound like a mouse, trembling in the chair, sweat beading on his forehead. "No. Serious? I didn't. I had no choice. James and lie." "Shut up!" Lupin snapped, suddenly lashing out and kicking Peter's chair. The legs scraped loudly across the floor. Dumbledore gently raised a hand to stop him. "Remus, violence does not solve problems." Vincent watched in silence. He had never seen Lupin so enraged. The man's usual gentleness was gone. The Veritaserum had clearly forced Peter to confess. Now everyone present understood that Peter had truly betrayed them. "He will be sent to Azkaban to face judgment from the Dementors," Fudge said, wiping his forehead. "But first he must be tried before the Wizengamot." Black laughed, sharp and cold. "Trial? Azkaban? What he did deserves execution. Azkaban is a joke." Peter whimpered and curled in on himself. "No, please." No one paid much attention to his pleas. Bones's monocle flashed in the light as she replied, unemotional but firm. "Mr. Black, I understand your anger, but legal procedures must be followed." She turned to Fudge, hardening her tone. "Minister, since the culprit has confessed, I recommend we convene an emergency Wizengamot trial." "This will take time," Fudge protested, wiping more sweat. "First, we must—" "Just execute him, Minister," Black interrupted, almost hysterical. "Just like you threw me into Azkaban back then." Dumbledore spoke then, his voice calm and final. "Hold the interrogation and judgment as soon as possible, Cornelius Amelia, the day after tomorrow, at the Wizengamot." "That should be acceptable," Fudge managed. With Dumbledore's word, objections fell away. When Fudge and Bones left the headmaster's office, Black and Peter were taken with them. Aurors stationed at Hogwarts would escort them back to the ministry. At the doorway, Amelia Bones looked back at those who remained. "The criminal will receive his due," she said. "Azkaban will not be his end." "Bones is someone you can trust," Dumbledore said slowly. "In truth, she has been most affected at the ministry. The previous head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement sent Black to Azkaban without fully understanding the circumstances. A grievous error. It must be corrected." Vincent nodded. He wasn't sure what to make of Amelia Bones, but in their brief exchange, she had left a favorable impression. Her undisguised contempt for Fudge was something he liked. "I should have seen it," Lupin said, sinking onto a sofa and running his fingers through his hair. "That Peter would do such a thing. We thought we were friends. We cared for him. I never believed he could." "An unworthy Gryffindor," Vincent said quietly. "Sorting doesn't mean everything." Chapter 259. Wizengamot. 2 days later, at the Ministry of Magic, the Wizengamot trial went ahead as scheduled. Adrian Wisen had been invited to observe. After all, it was he who had discovered and helped apprehend both Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew, and he might be called on to provide information. The courtroom was dim. Peter sat in the center, bound in chains to the defendant's chair, trembling. Nearby, Sirius Black stood, glaring with a vindictive intensity. The effects of the Veritaserum had just worn off. Around them, tiered benches held the jury, the 50-odd members of the Wizengamot, each in magenta robes with a silver W embroidered over the heart. Presiding as chief wizard was Albus Dumbledore. According to the Veritaserum confession, Sirius Black's testimony, and the factual details provided by Adrian Wisen, Dumbledore announced, Peter Pettigrew has committed unforgivable crimes, betraying you-know-who and causing the deaths of the Potters, framing an innocent man and condemning Sirius Black to 12 years in Azkaban, and blowing up a street, killing 12 muggles. Peter, chained to the chair, listened with a face ashen. He understood that confirmation of these charges would mean a cruel sentence, perhaps even the end of him. Vincent stood to one side, shaking his head subtly. He agreed with the judgment, but he could not help but be annoyed with the ministry. Nowhere in the proceedings had the ministry admitted its own failures. That omission was unsurprising. Ministry pride was a stubborn thing. Given the gravity of Peter Pettigrew's crimes, Dumbledore continued, I propose the highest available penalty, the Dementor's kiss. A heavy silence fell. The very air seemed to hold its breath. Peter's eyes widened with pure terror. The Dementor's kiss, for all practical purposes, was indistinguishable from death, an official, extreme punishment whereby Dementors removed a person's soul. Those who had gone through it remained alive in body, breathing, heart beating, but were empty within, devoid of consciousness, memory, personality. To most, it was worse than dying. Peter Pettigrew, Dumbledore said, by regulation you have the right of final statement. All attention turned to the short, balding man. His lips trembled. His eyes darted wildly over the benches, as if searching for an escape. His voice was thin. I was terrified. The Dark Lord threatened to kill my family. I had no choice. Sirius tightened his fists until his knuckles blanched. Peter's face slithered with tears and snot. Please, he begged, give me a chance to reform. I'll spend the rest of my life paying for what I've done. His cowardice laid bare. Peter drew snorts of contempt from the courtroom. Even Fudge's face twisted with disgust. Amelia Bones' gaze was ice. There was no pity for such a plea. The Wizengamot began to vote by show of hands. Almost every member raised theirs, with only a handful of abstentions. The verdict is passed, Dumbledore declared. Peter sagged in the chair as if his soul had already been taken. He was led away, and the courtroom gradually emptied. It had all felt rushed, only a few days of preparation, but the case was concluded. Vincent felt a quiet satisfaction. Sirius's name was cleared at last, and peace could return to his life. He had had enough of danger and adventure. Now he preferred the steady days of teaching at Hogwarts and tending plants in his spare time. He also knew, unsettlingly, that Voldemort's eventual return had been tied closely to Peter. With Pettigrew arrested so early, perhaps the Dark Lord's resurrection could at least be delayed. A familiar, cloying voice interrupted his thoughts. Professor Vincent. Cornelius Fudge and a short, plump woman approached, their magenta robes folded over their arms, the jury garments removed. The woman wore a pink wool suit, a lace headband in her fluffy curls, and a saccharine smile. Vincent immediately recognized Dolores Umbridge, now Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic. He kept a polite smile. Minister, Miss Umbridge, he said. I heard, Mr. Vincent, Umbridge purred. Thanks to your help, this matter could be resolved. That wretched criminal deceived everyone. I only did my duty, Vincent replied evenly. Professor, you're too modest, Fudge said with exaggerated geniality. The result was finally what the ministry wanted. Black's matter was settled. When will Peter be dealt with? Vincent asked. It's not technically the death penalty, Fudge said in a lower tone, but it will be carried out in 2 weeks' time. We'll keep him in Azkaban's most secure cell until then. We've tightened the prison's defenses, given special instructions to the Dementors. He will be watched around the clock. Vincent said nothing. He could not shake the feeling that Fudge lacked conviction. The memory of Black's escape was still fresh. Another failure would be a disaster for the ministry. As Fudge and Umbridge moved on, passers-by acknowledged Vincent with nods and the occasional offer of conversation. He politely declined and left the ministry hearth. Dumbledore had arranged temporary access to the headmaster's office flue, and with a swirl of green flame, Vincent returned to Hogwarts. He stepped out into the headmaster's office and was startled by the crowd. Nearly every professor was gathered there. Clearly they had come to hear the verdict. Gossip, Vincent thought wryly, was as inevitable as ever. Vincent! Remus Lupin was the first to reach him, eager. Is the trial over? How are Sirius and Peter? Chapter 260. Desperate Ron. The trial is over, Vincent said with a slight nod. Peter is about to receive a Dementor's kiss. As for Black, he has been declared innocent. The ministry will officially withdraw the warrant and restore his reputation. He will, however, be under observation for a month. Lupin's shoulders relaxed and the tension drained from his face. The other professors in the office looked relieved as well. They had already been told the truth by Dumbledore. Only one person remained an exception, Snape. From the moment Vincent entered the headmaster's office, Snape had been stone-faced. This was not good news to him. Aside from James Potter, his greatest enemy had always been Sirius Black. "How touching, Lupin," Snape said in a low voice. "Black is innocent, just as you wanted, isn't he? Here's a suggestion. Leave Hogwarts and reunite with your dear old friend. You never should have been here." "Severus?" McGonagall started, but after that cruel remark, Snape simply turned and left the room. Lupin gave a helpless smile. He knew Snape had always opposed him teaching at Hogwarts. Snape had even emphasized lycanthropy and wolfsbane potion in potions class, clearly intended to make students notice signs of a werewolf. Snape had thought that would expose him. Of course, Snape had no chance now. Since Lupin had taken the second version of the purification potion, he could control his transformations freely on full moon nights. Even on a full moon, no one could unmask him. News of Peter spread fast through the wizarding world. The next morning, the Daily Prophet carried a big report. The Great Hall was calm. Most students had no idea what had happened. Owls flew in through the windows as usual, dropping packages and letters among the feathers. A copy of the Prophet thudded onto the table in front of Harry. "Who ordered the paper?" Harry asked, looking around. "I did," Hermione said, chewing a piece of bread, one hand on a heavy ancient runes dictionary and the other smeared with jam. "Can I read it?" "Suit yourself." Harry opened the paper, and the headline caught his eye at once. "Shocking. Peter Pettigrew not dead. Truth of 12 years ago revealed. Ministry officially withdraws Sirius Black's warrant." His eyes widened. "Ron, come here." Reluctantly, Ron put down the sausage he'd been about to eat, leaned over, and squinted at the headline. "Sirius Black's warrant's been withdrawn?" He sounded puzzled. "Why? Because he was wrongly accused? Look at this." Harry pointed to a photograph in the article. Ron saw a short, stout man he somehow recognized, sitting in a chair with a dazed expression. Photos in the wizarding world couldn't capture sound, but the man's mouth looked like it was moving. "This is..." Ron went pale. He had seen that face before. Not just seen, it had been Scabbers. "Peter Pettigrew," Harry said. 12 years ago he framed Sirius, then turned into a rat and hid for 12 years. Look at his face." "Scabbers," Ron breathed, his own expression mirroring the blankness in the photo. He had nearly forgotten the whole thing, and now he remembered with a jolt. He had been sleeping in the same house as a murderer for years. An ugly, pervy-looking murderer at that. Ron covered his face and collapsed onto the table. Hermione looked up at the commotion. "What's wrong?" she asked. Harry handed her the paper and explained about Scabbers and Pettigrew. A flicker of pity crossed her face as she looked at Ron. "This is hard to believe," she sighed. "It sounds ridiculous, but animagus is difficult to detect. It's not surprising no one discovered it." Harry, already curious about animagus magic, remembered Vincent saying he could try learning it over the summer. Hermione turned the paper and frowned at another article. Professor Adrian Wisen of Hogwarts was the first to discover Peter Pettigrew hiding at the school. It is worth mentioning that Vincent and Dumbledore's relationship is unusually close. According to the writer's speculation, there seems to be a special connection between them. The rest of the piece was a string of obvious fabrications. Hermione checked the byline. Rita Skeeter. No wonder. Rita lived on sensationalism. For many readers, her made-up stories were part of the attraction. Hermione folded the paper closed and handed it back to Harry. "At least it's good news about Black," she said. "We won't have to worry about him being a threat anymore, and you can go to Hogsmeade without fuss." "Yeah." Harry nodded absent-mindedly and glanced at Ron. Ron had sat up and was staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. Harry didn't interrupt him. He looked again at the photograph of Sirius on the front, standing a little gaunt and worn, but with sharp, bright eyes. From what the professors had hinted, Sirius had been very close to Harry's parents. Harry wondered what sort of man he was and whether he could learn more about his parents. He thought about Hedwig. Perhaps she could carry a letter to Sirius Black.